gate of sixth sense. It opened by sensing things that could harm the body. This was like an antenna that detected movements around oneself within a certain radius. It became clear once the gate, based on instinct, was opened.
If I use it differently.
Perhaps I could read the movements of the person behind me. He visualized the movements of Rem, who was behind him, picking his nose and flicking it away, rubbing his body inside the warm leather, then lifting his head. His gaze stopped at Enkrid's back. To explain the detailed process, he heard the sounds, guessed the reason for those sounds, and then predicted the opponent's movements. But all of these steps happened in an instant. This was the gate of sixth sense. It was what one could do with an open gate.
With this.
It didn't seem difficult to avoid someone swinging a club from behind. It was the realm of sixth sense, intuition, and instinct. Only then did he understand the instinctive hunting method of beasts that Jackson mentioned. The gate of sixth sense was meant to instantly condense all surrounding information and embed it into one's mind, so, if applied, one could focus and even know that Rem was picking his nose behind him.
Mindless people call this the mind's eye, but that's all nonsense. It just means you've gotten a better sense, that's all.
According to Jackson's explanation, that was it. So it was natural that the range of usage would expand the more it was applied. Of course, there were things to be cautious about.
If you rely too much on your senses, you could be fooled in reverse, so be careful.
Jackson said, placing his left hand on Enkrid's shoulder, and just before Jackson's hand touched his shoulder, Enkrid had the illusion that Jackson was aiming for his neck with that hand. It was a subtle trick. In a way, it was similar to the Valen mercenary sword technique. Opening the gate of sixth sense didn't change the repetitive nature of today. It didn't. Enkrid began to live the same today again. However, he felt a premonition that the outcome of today would be different from those so far. In truth, it was hardly even a premonition. He now had the confidence to overcome that vicious trap. He donned leather armor, a longsword at his left hip, and a guard sword with a thick blade at his back. He packed the sheath with whistling knives and hid small knives in both his ankles. Layering a gambeson over this completed the light infantry's full armament. He was so familiar with it that he didn't waste time arming himself. He hurriedly finished his breakfast and moved out for this purpose.
If I just grab a few more torches on the way.
It was a path he had taken dozens of times. Even stopping by the general store on the way was so familiar that it was tiresome from the repetition.
Are you planning to threaten the cobbler by putting a sword to his neck? Or are you going to fight for your boots and your life?
Rem, who had heard the gist of the task, said. Rem, lying on the bed, stuck his head out and spoke.
I won't return until I've cut 10 boots.
It was a joke he made every day.
Somehow, even though today keeps repeating, it feels like I'm making the same jokes.
He could see Rem's inner thoughts. It wasn't the monster hunt but going to the shoe shop that bothered him.
Finish it quickly and go chop off the monster's head.
Rem snorted and spoke. Enkrid nodded and thought. No one would suspect that there would be such a cave under the craftsman's shop. It was a natural assumption.
I didn't believe it until I saw it myself.
So he was curious again. What could be beyond it? Esther's send-off. Enkrid tapped Esther's nose with his fingertip to remember today. Caught off guard, Esther stepped back, shook her head left and right, and soon let out a fierce cry. Finding it quite cute, Enkrid smiled and said,
I'm off.
Leaving the lodging, he stopped by the general store, bought 3 torches, tucked 2 into his belt, and held one like a club as he walked. He moved quickly and arrived at the craftsman's shop.
Look, there's a hole here.
He heard the startled craftsman say.
Yes, there's a hole. I'll check it out.
The craftsman, speaking in surprise, looked Enkrid up and down instead of making a fuss.
Are you going to war?
Even patrol soldiers didn't charge in so fully armed. Seeing Enkrid in thick cloth armor and armed to the teeth, the craftsman couldn't help but say such words.
Do your best in everything, no matter how small. That's what my sword instructor told me.
Indeed, a passing sword instructor had said something like that. So it wasn't a lie. In reality, it was just that he had thoroughly prepared for anything that might happen.
Someone has laid a vicious trap, so you mustn't go inside, even by mistake.
When Enkrid casually looked into the hole and warned the craftsman, his face turned pale. Then he asked,
You can tell just by looking inside?
He was a bit hasty, Enkrid thought and spoke again.
I'm an expert in this field.
Responding nonchalantly, the craftsman reluctantly nodded and then finally reacted as Enkrid had expected.
A trap? What trap? Why is there something like this under my shop?
Well, that was something Enkrid couldn't know, but he wouldn't remain in the dark for long. He was about to find out. A trap was set, and it performed its role. What was obvious from this was, if he overcame the trap, there would be something. There must be something to hide if one goes to the effort of concealing it.
Why did they do this here?
Enkrid paused to catch his breath, then continued.
I'm about to find out.
Enkrid's curiosity was also piqued. He responded and skillfully stepped down the slope. He knew exactly where and in what shape the cave had formed. He could see it with his eyes closed. He had walked this path dozens of times. He had roamed this narrow cave repeatedly, aiming to open the gate of sixth sense. As a result, he could almost memorize the ground's undulations. Then he stood before the 6 branching paths again. Explosions were in the first and second passages. Blades of wind fell vertically in the third passage. There was no need to spend more time training his sixth sense. He had done enough.
Then,
Which of the 6 paths is safe? Instead of answering the question, he repeated inwardly, Enkrid wanted to crack open the head of the one who made this.
sly.
Because all 6 were traps, if his sixth sense was not mistaken. Of course, during dozens of today's repetitions, he had also checked his sixth sense. Was the sense of danger detection correct? It was the correct sense. In fact, Enkrid realized that even the 6th path was wrong. Entering the 6th passage, a hazy smoke spread from above. The moment it touched his skin, blisters would form, and inhaling it would gift a pain incomparable to being cut by a sword or stabbed by a spear, a toxic mist. All 6 passages gave off a sense of foreboding. There was no path, it was blocked. Should he stop here? Was he stuck? Was there nothing more he could do? He instinctively knew that he had to move beyond this cave to escape today. Stopping because the path was blocked meant being trapped in today. The opponent wasn't a soldier skilled in thrusting, nor was it an assassin who approached silently. It wasn't an enemy group encountered on an unfavorable battlefield. It was just a trap. An unmoving stationary spell trap that lacked reason. Enkrid stood before the first passage.
One wrong step and I'm roasted.
How does a spell trap activate? Having opened the gate of sixth sense, it could be observed from the realm of instinct. No torch was needed. Enkrid stepped into the passage. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead with each step he took. It felt like he was narrowly avoiding blades sharp enough to cut with just a touch. The activation principle of the trap was detection. He walked, avoiding the places that felt ominous. By activating focus point and letting the boldness of the beast infuse his heart, there was no wavering in his steps. By opening the gate of sixth sense while maintaining focus, he stepped into the gaps of the spell trap. To someone else, it would just look like he was walking in a zigzag pattern. But Enkrid felt like he was walking a tightrope. Even so, he thought it was manageable. Sixth sense, the realm of intuition. He broke through the trap with instinct alone. How many people could do such a thing? His chest swelled with a sense of accomplishment. Of course, it was time to put such emotions aside for a moment.
For now.
He had passed the first one. Then, looking beyond the darkness, he lit a torch. Examining the path carefully, he didn't feel the same sense of foreboding as before. However, it was certain that there was something ahead. It was an intuition. Enkrid walked forward cautiously and soon saw the creature that greeted him. With a hunched back, bony spikes protruding where its spine should be. Its skin was pale enough to appear blue in the torchlight. Its mouth was several times larger than a human's, drooling thick saliva as if it was hungry. Its nails were long, its forearms thick, and its eyes were black. Through its cracked skin, the texture of muscles could be seen faintly. Thanks to its hunched back, its fists touched the ground. It was a ghoul. In this world, there were demonic creatures and demonic beasts. According to theologians, these beings were created in ancient times when gods killed each other. But that was not Enkrid's concern. What mattered was that such creatures existed. If they resembled beasts, they were called demonic beasts. Everything else was referred to as demonic creatures. Ghouls were cannibalistic monsters among them.
Why are you popping out here?
Could this be considered undead? The craftsman's words were half correct. There was a monster below. But instead of skeletal soldiers, it was a ghoul that emerged. Demonic creatures had no intelligence for conversation. They only charged at their prey. Ghouls eat humans. Their flat, upturned noses, which appeared as holes stuck to their faces without any bridge, were organs capable of smelling humans. The creatures, smelling their prey, rushed forward. The cave wasn't too narrow. It wasn't spacious enough to move freely and swing a sword around either. There was enough room to maneuver based on the environment. Srung, clang. The moment he saw the charging ghoul, Enkrid drew his longsword and held it diagonally forward.
3.
There were 2 more behind the first one. Typically, it would take 2 or 3 spearmen to take down a single ghoul. An experienced soldier might manage to kill one with a sword alone. Tactically, it's best to avoid such attempts if possible. Of course, if unavoidable, one might have to punch the ghoul's face, just like Enkrid was about to. He thrust the diagonally held blade forward, embedding it in the chest of the first ghoul. Gripping the sword with only his left hand, he pressed down at an outward angle. A ghastly scream erupted that no human vocal cords could ever produce. The ghoul, impaled by the sword, fell to its knees, dragged down by Enkrid's strength. As a result, the blade slid about a finger's length lower into the ghoul's body, but it couldn't be sliced in half. Even this put a strain on the muscles of his left arm. As he subdued one ghoul, another one lunged at him, slashing its claws. Expecting this, Enkrid pivoted around his left foot, dodging, and struck out with his now free right hand. The ghoul's head snapped back from the punch. The force was fully transmitted, leaving the ghoul dazed. With its charge halted, the third ghoul tried to leap forward. Its outstretched hand reached farther than the other 2. Ghouls are inherently misshapen creatures. Some had long arms, others had thick legs. Enkrid had already noticed the movements of the last ghoul and simply turned his head to avoid the stabbing claws. Having created an opening, what should he do next?
1 at a time.
He needed to kill them. In the past, truly in the past, before he began repeating today, he would have already been dead. But now, his accumulated experience, swordsmanship, and martial arts had reached an exceptional level. Gripping the sword with both hands, he slashed downward, his arm muscles tensed. One ghoul split from chest to groin, spilling purple entrails below. The fallen torch illuminated the faces of the remaining 2 ghouls, casting long shadows behind them. The 2 monsters, having forgotten fear, charged again. Even when there had been 3, Enkrid had easily killed one, and now his sword danced once more. Stepping towards the simple moves of the ghouls, he decapitated one with a horizontal upper slash using his medium sword technique. For the last ghoul, he tripped it, then stomped on its head with all his might. The head didn't burst like a pumpkin, but black fluid trickled from the cracked head.
Now I'm really curious.
Enkrid said as he vertically drove his sword into the remaining ghoul's head. The sword tip pierced through the ghoul's head and into the ground. Enkrid withdrew the sword, leaving the ghoul's shattered head. 3 ghouls. It would have required at least 6 low-ranking soldiers to fight them, but Enkrid had easily defeated them. The ghoul's claws were poisonous, so even a scratch could have been fatal, but he hadn't been touched. This was a moment that proved all his training hadn't been in vain. Even though no one had seen it, which was a bit disappointing, he would soon show the hidden one inside just how ruthless his sword could be. After taking a few deep breaths, he shook the ghoul's fluids from his sword, pulled out a piece of cheap linen from his pocket, and wiped the blade clean. Then, Enkrid proceeded further inside. Heading into the cave was akin to moving towards tomorrow. There was no hesitation.
How to read and respond to moves.
While being hit by Rem, while listening to Jackson talk about the 6th sense, while squeezing his body with Auden through the isolation technique. He also faithfully learned swordsmanship from Ragna. Regardless of how much his skills improved, he remained consistent.
Doesn't it feel frustrating?
Ragna would often ask Enkrid this. Frustrating? There was no reason for that. Ragna's teachings were a path and a milestone after learning the basics. How long had the days been when he wandered without knowing the way? Now, the moment he took one step forward, he immediately saw another path, and it was just enjoyable. How should one react when the opponent strikes with a sword? What if the opponent is a beast? What if someone suddenly stabs a spear from behind? In any situation, how should one extend their sword? Once you have the basics, the next thing to master is how to apply them. You can't respond to every situation. It was similar to that. The point is to grasp the knack. Of course, it wasn't easy.
I thought this would end a bit quicker.
Ragnar said that, but it wasn't possible. Enkrid knew that his talent was lacking. If he had a decent level of talent, would he have struggled this much? Probably not. But he doesn't resent it. Instead of wasting time on resentment, he'd swing his sword one more time.
The application of swordsmanship only makes sense if you read and respond to moves.
Whether the opponent is a beast, a monster, or an enemy soldier, you observe their movements, discern between tricks and truths, and then cut or stab with your sword. Ragnar taught tirelessly. Enkrid did not tire either, but the progress was endlessly slow. He knew he was slow and lacking. He had to work several times harder than others. Therefore, every surrounding thing, every situation, environment, and any given short moment, he used everything as a tool for growth. That's what Enkrid did. Digging through the cave and moving forward, 4 wolf beasts jumped out. Woof, woof! The creatures barked like dogs and charged without giving him a moment to breathe. The dynamic wolf beasts, kicking up dirt from the ground as they charged, made one's knees buckle just by looking at them. Their eyes filled with ferocity, tongues lolling, drool dripping from their jaws, and yellow teeth gleaming red in the torchlight.
The heart of the beast.
Boldness, due to which he could thrust the blade right in front of him without flinching. It was the same now. Enkrid remained unfazed. In the time it took to catch his breath a few times, the wolf beasts had closed the distance. Enkrid supplemented his sword skills with instinctive intuition. It was a reflexive response born from boldness. He believed this would also become a stepping stone for growth, and aimed to incorporate it into his training.
There is no better training than real combat.
The only drawback was that it required risking his life each time. He couldn't afford to spend today in vain. If he wanted to live a life where every day was just about clinging to life, he would have tilled the fields and sought the blessings of the gods instead of dreaming about his goals. Even though he valued today dearly, he still had to risk his life to move forward. This was the only path for Enkrid to continue pursuing his dreams. He wasn't rushing to die, but risking his life to live. As his instincts dictated, following his instincts. The sound of the wolf beast's teeth clashing was right in front of him. Enkrid pulled his left foot back to avoid the wolf beast's bite, and with a movement of his elbow, he struck downwards with his sword. Smash! Clank! He didn't strike with the blade, but with the flat of the sword. The wolf beast, struck heavily on the head, fell to the ground. He swung his sword and naturally stepped left. Although he had thrown the torch to one side, it hadn't gone out, so it served as a light source. As he stepped to the left, Enkrid shielded his body with the torch and avoided the wolf's forepaw. With a thud, a heavy blow passed through the spot where Enkrid's abdomen had been. If he had been caught, his gambeson would surely have been torn to shreds. A beast was a monster with the characteristics of a beast. 2 of them, more cunningly, turned to attack from behind, perhaps thinking they had an opportunity. The 2 wolves, with their mouths looking like short knives, charged at Enkrid, targeting his thighs. Squeak! A strange noise echoed through the dark cave illuminated by only one torch. It was a fleeting moment. Enkrid turned his body and flicked his hand, sending a whistling knife into the forehead of one of the charging wolf beasts with a sharp thud. It was as fast as a ray of light. Meanwhile, the other wolf, which had charged in, pulled back its thigh to dodge and simultaneously raised its knee to attack. It seemed it wasn't a heavy impact, as the wolf beast hit on the knee didn't retreat. Instead, showing off its leg muscles, it tried to press down on Enkrid's instep with its forepaw. Enkrid stepped back half a step, pulling his raised knee behind him to avoid the forepaw targeting his instep, and positioned himself between the 2 wolf beasts, blocking his front and rear. It was almost as if he was surrounded. Even in a situation that could be called a crisis, Enkrid's eyes weren't focused on the 2 wolf beasts. Focus and more focus. It no longer felt like everything around him was moving slowly. It wasn't that only dots and lines remained, or that he couldn't see anything else. He simply could clearly see the movements of the wolf beasts. He could predict their next moves in his mind. Seeing the beasts' next moves, Enkrid's actions became simple. There was no need to complicate things by tricking and maneuvering to corner the opponent. He let his sword hang and then swung it wide. Although it was too narrow to swing side to side, the height of the cave was sufficient for drawing a large semicircle vertically. What kind of sword was the medium sword technique? He recalled what he had learned as a basic. It was a sword technique that excelled in breaking things with one strike. The two wolf beasts charged simultaneously. Enkrid executed the movement he had visualized in his mind. Whoosh! Thud! Crack! Crunch! The long sword he swung with all his might did its job. The wolf beast on the side of the sword was split from chest to jaw to head. The one hit by the descending arc of the semicircle had its head burst open. If the timing had been slightly off, he would have been bitten by at least one of the two beasts. The current strike was a display of strength.
Who?
Enkrid exhaled the breath he had been holding, calming his heart.
One.
One beast remained. While the remaining wolf beast hesitated, Enkrid jumped forward. Oddly, he ran not directly at the wolf beast but to its left. The beast didn't even seem to notice and jumped in the same direction.
Pivot on the left foot.
In an extreme state of concentration, following intuition, body, and the condensed experience from training, he planted his left foot on the ground and extended his sword. It was a thrust. The tip of the sword pierced into the wolf's mouth and came out the back of its head. With the sound, the weight of the wolf was felt in his arms. Naturally, he let go of his strength and dropped the wolf to the ground with a thud. Enkrid stepped on the head of the wolf, which had a hole from its mouth to its head, and pulled out the sword. As the sword was pulled out with a squelch, the red blood of the beast flowed onto the ground. The body of the wolf beast trembled, gasp. The last breath of the remaining beast dispersed meaninglessly. Leaving the dead beasts behind with his arms hanging down, Enkrid reflected on what he had just done.
I can see.
The movements of the wolf beasts were simple, movements driven by instinct, so they fell under the realm of the sixth sense. The focus of a single point and the instinct of the sixth sense. It was a series of sword strikes relying on the combined senses.
I can do it.
At this moment, it felt like he could demonstrate the applied sword techniques Ragna had spoken of, read the opponent's intentions and movements. After that, it was just about bringing down the sword, trained through basics. Deceiving the opponent followed a similar logic.
It's something you already know how to do. It's just about formalizing it and attaching it to your body.
Ragna's words suddenly came to mind. Yes, that's right. It's something he originally did. But knowing and doing it versus not knowing and doing it were as different as a cat and a tiger. Enkrid clenched and unclenched his hand, reflecting and re-reflecting. Even as he moved forward with the torch, he continuously envisioned his sword in his mind. Being able to stick it to the body with just one try was the privilege of the talented, so he pondered and repeated. Enkrid made everything part of his training. After that, no more monsters or beasts appeared. Instead, he found a passage at the end of the tunnel that connected to the sewers. Only then did he see something other than swordsmanship.
Crazy bastard.
Digging such a tunnel up to here. What kind of madness is this? Spell traps were expensive. They weren't cheap rat traps. What's the intention behind blocking all 6 paths with such traps? Even a wealthy merchant with a lot of krona wouldn't normally do such a thing. Not to mention there were ghouls called man-eaters and beasts. Why go to such lengths to block the way? What on earth is waiting behind this? He saw part of the answer to that question.
Crazy bastard.
Enkrid's mouth opened involuntarily. The place he arrived at, following the sewer that reeked of a foul smell. In the torchlight, he saw things hanging like laundry everywhere. They were made by driving nails into the wall and hanging strings from them. They weren't clothes. They were parts that should have been wearing those clothes. It was a scene of horror beyond words, with human entrails, flesh, and bones. Even Enkrid, who had seen plenty of gruesome sights in his life, felt nauseated by such a horrible scene.
Crazy bastard.
He was someone who absolutely needed to be killed. He was someone who deserved to die. Isn't killing such a person also the duty of a knight? Enkrid knew that dreaming alone did not make one a knight. But he couldn't just ignore this after seeing it. Amidst the scene, he noticed some relatively intact bodies, still somewhat resembling human forms. One of them seemed to be alive. It blinked its eyes a few times before opening its mouth. It couldn't speak. Of course it couldn't. How could a person with only a head left speak? The very fact that it was opening its eyes and trying to speak in that state was grotesque. What is it trying to say? It was hard to even guess. If it were Enkrid himself, he would probably beg to be killed. He couldn't tell how it was even moving. Furthermore, he couldn't fathom how the string was threaded through its head, nor did he want to know. Despite having been through many ordeals, this scene of horror was truly repulsive.
What are you?
A voice came then. Enkrid's gaze turned towards the source of the voice. It was at the end of the path decorated with human corpses. In the corner of the sewer, he saw the face of a corpse enthusiast. It was a young man with a pale white face. He wore a drab green robe and had long hair. Enkrid asked,
This is your work, isn't it?
The man seemed to ponder for a moment before speaking to himself.
How did you get here? Does God love me? Seeing how they send a test subject my way even if I do nothing. Let's see. You seem to be a regular soldier with a well-trained body. This is good. Good.
The young man's voice was light and cheerful. He sounded like a blacksmith who had received high-quality iron, or a merchant who had struck a profitable deal. In a way, he also seemed like an innocent young man confessing his feelings. It was strange and eerie.
What should I make out of you?
Enkrid raised the torch high. He saw beyond the flickering shadows behind the man. There was a strange corpse patched together in various ways, leaning against the wall. Its eyes were closed and it showed no signs of breathing. Enkrid judged it to be a corpse.
Isn't it lovely? This will be my greatest masterpiece. Its name is Varmilo.
Enkrid reached a conclusion. There was no need for further conversation. A perfectly insane bastard. Enkrid threw the torch. With a crackle and a roar, the torch spun through the air, leaving a round, long trajectory as it flew towards the madman's head. But the madman merely raised his hand and deflected the torch. A spell. So he was a wizard. But did that mean he should stop? No. Those who need to die should die. Enkrid threw the torch, and even though he saw it deflected with a mere gesture, he did not stop. Enkrid lowered his body as he kicked off the ground. He slid forward on the sticky ground of the sewer. Kicking through the filth, he reached the wizard with a swift move, accompanied by a hissing sound. Using the momentum of his run, he swung his sword. The diagonal slash from below cut through the darkness left by the vanished torch. Esther usually stuck close at night, but on days when Enkrid was in the city, she would sometimes wander near him. Of course, there were many days when she didn't.
Just sticking close at night is enough.
And there was no need to be with him all the time. On a typical day, she would just hang around in the camp, killing time. Goodbye. She saw Enkrid off as he left, but while she was off guard, he flicked her on the nose. This bastard?
I'm leaving.
Then he walked out. After that, Esther secretly followed Enkrid.
What's he up to, flicking someone's nose like that?
It started out of pure curiosity. Esther's pursuit was triggered by Enkrid's whimsical flick. What hadn't happened yesterday happened today. Tap, tap. The Black Panther swiftly moved through the alleys, stepping on rooftops where she wouldn't be seen by others. She moved with light and graceful steps. It was no challenge to move unseen. Thus, Esther followed Enkrid into the underground.
What is he up to again?
It was pure curiosity. Then, in the place where Enkrid had entered, she caught the foul scent of a spell.
This could be bad.
The human she had chosen seemed about to die. This was troublesome. He was still someone she needed. She had to go inside. Avoiding spell traps was nothing for Esther. Once she had sung to the stars and was a witch who embraced them. Such crude traps were no match for her, so she saw the man fighting the ghoul.
Has he improved?
She wasn't knowledgeable about swordsmanship, but she had watched Enkrid every single day.
He has improved.
She could see his growth. Then he killed the wolf beasts. Even to Esther, this seemed strange.
What is this?
Enkrid moved as if possessed. With her eyes piercing the darkness, she saw his movements as a series of incomprehensible actions. He swung, slashed, and stabbed with his sword. He kicked the wolves with his feet and knees. She thought it was chaos, yet he sustained no serious injuries. He only got a few scratches, which merely marred his armor. Could such results come from a messy fight?
Are the beasts half-wits?
It didn't seem like it. Of course, if she had regained her original power, Such beasts and monsters wouldn't dare to even lift their heads towards her.
But he keeps going.
He should have turned back by now. Enkrid kept moving forward, and eventually Esther also saw the scene of carnage. She wasn't shocked. Among those who crafted spells, there were all sorts of crazy people, and she eventually realized that what lay beyond was a wizard.
What should I do?
Should she help when dealing with a wizard? With the tiny bit of strength she had gathered. Doing so would mean needing more time to regain her body. She had imbued some energy into Enkrid's armor, but still.
This is a headache.
In the end, she withheld judgment and hid herself, following Enkrid. She watched as he confronted the wizard. Enkrid exchanged a few words, and then immediately attacked. Afterward, Esther was surprised and then surprised again. It was warranted. The man called Enkrid filled the eyes of the hidden lake panther, who wore darkness like a cloak, and the man was performing unbelievable feats. The plan was to close the distance and end it with one strike. As he raised his sword, something struck Enkrid in the face. A heavy blow, as if hit by Rem's fist. Falling from his rear, another heavy impact was felt over Enkrid's head. Instinctively, Enkrid tucked his chin and rolled to the side. Then again, an invisible something, an intangible shockwave, struck where he had been. There was no dirty sewage there. Instead, a damp heap of dirt splattered onto his face. Enkrid's eyes, squinting in one eye, darted around.
Can't see it.
It must be a spell. It's an obvious guess. He saw a head with only its face moving its lips. Who else could do such a thing?
You dodged. You're just making it harder for yourself. Stay still, and it won't hurt.
The male wizard said, waving his hand. Since he couldn't see it, there was no way to block it. Enkrid rolled to the side again. A blade of wind whizzed past where he had been. Of course, Enkrid didn't know what it was. He only knew it was some kind of spell.
What should I do in this situation?
He had met many swordsmanship instructors, and they all had one thing to say when it came to wizards.
A wizard. There's only one way to deal with them. Run. Don't look back. Just run. Don't engage. If you don't want to live a life worse than death, suffering endlessly, if you're lucky, you'll die. If you're unlucky, don't even think about it.
Considering some of them were quite famous, it emphasized the danger of wizards and their spells. On the other hand, the troublemaker squad members had a different perspective on wizards.
Shoot them with an arrow.
That was Rem.
Kill them when they're not looking.
That was Jackson.
If you really have to fight, just get close, brother.
A typical answer from Auden. As for Ragna, if you just cut them, they die the same, was his response. In any case, the conclusion here was, it's better to avoid wizards, but if you absolutely have to kill one, refer to Ragna's words.
If you cut them, they die the same.
So that's what he would do. There was no option to run away. If left alone, the wizard would keep doing the same thing. People would be torn apart like old rags, left in shreds. He thought of the shoemaker and his daughter. If left alone, they would be the first to die, the shoemaker and his daughter. Even though it was one-sided, he had observed them for dozens of days. Even without interaction, they had prepared meals and left worries for Enkrid, who lingered at the crossroads. They might not know about Enkrid's struggles. Yes, they wouldn't know, but that wasn't important. Even if no one knew, there were things that had to be protected. That was Enkrid's dream, the path he had chosen to walk, and the destination pointed to by his signpost.
Come on, don't run away. Be good. It's okay.
The wizard said, snapping his fingers. With a snap, a light rose above the sewer. It was a light source much brighter than a torch. Thanks to the light floating above, shadows spread out at his feet. The wizard neither smiled nor got angry. For him, this was just a job. Enkrid, seeing the wizard, focused even more, opening the gate of sixth sense wide. The wizard didn't care about Enkrid's movements. To him, the opponent was just an experiment, a bug, a piece of meat. In his eyes, Enkrid appeared that way. When his hand moved again, an intangible shockwave flew out.
Luck is on my side.
That's how it appeared to the wizard. Enkrid had dodged the spell by jumping to the side. Enkrid was moving, relying on a strange sense.
I can't see it.
Just because he couldn't see it didn't mean it wasn't there. Along with a small realization, then couldn't he feel it, with concentration and the sixth sense combined, predicting the movements of a wolf beast. This time, seeing the necrophile wizard's hand gesture, he predicts what's next and tries to feel anything. That's what Enkrid did. The wizard shaped the wind into blades and threw them. Blades of wind flew, curving from 3 directions simultaneously. Sharper than the scythe of death if it hit, it would cut through that ragged armor with ease. A spell like that, but Enkrid rolled to the side to avoid it.
Dodged again.
Even while speaking, the wizard kept moving his hands. Invisible shockwaves and blades continuously targeted Enkrid. Enkrid dodged them all. It wasn't luck. It was a sense, a realm beyond the 5 senses, the 6th sense. Half-closed eyes, ears twitching, skin prickling. Everything hinted at the wizard's tricks. Meanwhile, he sought a way to kill his opponent. Logically, it would have ended with just one throw of a whistling knife. If a cut could kill, then piercing the neck or head would kill too.
No, that's not right.
It was pure instinct. The 6th sense said the knife wouldn't kill him. So what was the best option? Whether it was natural or not, he was dodging magic purely by instinct. The opponent was doing something strange with spells, but
If I just think of it as arrows or blades,
if he thought of the enemy wielding blunt weapons or swords,
is it threatening?
no, he could dodge it. In fact, Mitch Hurrier's sword was sharper. So he dodged. He could dodge it. If the whistling knife wouldn't work, it was time to recall Auden's advice.
Just get close.
He dodged and then kicked off the ground in one swift move. He saw the wizard's eyes widen.
You.
The wizard was shocked. The guy had dodged invisible magic and closed the distance with a raised sword in one leap. The soldier's blade was now within a threatening distance. It was Enkrid's range, the swordsman's range. As the long sword's blade descended over his head, the wizard urgently shouted,
Devour.
Powerful mana and spell combined to manifest in the world. The wizard's words became reality, exerting their force. It was a spell only a wizard who had experienced a deep, dark world could see. The manifested spell. Originally, the wizard's spell should have cut away parts of Enkrid's intestines. This was not a spell that could be dodged by instinct, but nothing happened. Well, something did happen. The wizard was bewildered. The spell that should have manifested had reflected back and hit him. He could see the inside of Enkrid's torn cloth armor, cut by the wind blades, black leather armor, reeking of magical aura.
What are you wearing?
Something good.
Enkrid replied as he noticed the wizard's eyes falling upon his armor. It seemed as though whatever trick the wizard had used had been blocked by the armor. Enkrid was quick-witted, and his hands were just as quick. The blade cut through the air. The descending metal was a sword forged by blacksmiths with the magic of hammers and flames. The head was severed and burst. He felt resistance as the sword cut through, but he pressed down with Borfusit. The wizard, dying, felt a deep sense of injustice.
I had so much prepared. Varmilo.
He tried to summon his child, named Varmilo. Of course, he failed at everything. The dead can do nothing. This was no different for a wizard. Delusions after death could not affect reality.
You seem regretful.
Enkrid kicked the dead wizard. Afterward, Enkrid took off his torn gambeson. He couldn't wear it any longer. It wasn't even fit to use as a rag. He didn't feel a surge of satisfaction. He hardly felt any relief at surviving. The threat to his life? It had existed, but he had overcome it. He only felt that he had done what needed to be done. He had killed the one who needed to be killed. That was it.
Before cleaning up.
Wasn't this guy the type to set up various spell traps? He searched the inside carefully, thinking there might be hidden items. He was quite cautious in case another trap was triggered. He found a thick brown book, a pouch containing 5 krona gold coins, a black wooden staff, a few blue and white stones, and a pair of brown gloves. Enkrid took everything. The rest were unknown herbs and other unidentifiable items. They all looked suspicious, and he had no desire to take them. Enkrid was about to head back, wiping and sheathing his sword when the blade snapped in the middle with a clang.
Damn.
He sighed involuntarily. It wasn't because he had used the sword too roughly. He did feel a strange resistance when he cut the last wizard. Could that be the cause? He couldn't know. Anyway, he would have to use the krona coins the mad wizard had stashed to buy another sword.
Should I try to reforge it?
It was said to be Valyrian steel, so if fixed, it might be usable again. Enkrid turned around and left. His stomach ached and his head pounded from the multiple shockwaves he had endured, but it was bearable. As he walked, Enkrid stopped after less than 10 steps and turned back.
It's not going out?
He thought the wizard had cast a spell. The light source above his head was still there. Furrowing his brows in confusion, he looked up and saw a stone emitting light, floating in the air.
A magic tool floating by itself.
It reeked of Krona.
What is this?
It was just a fist-sized stone. He jumped up and grabbed it, and it continued to emit light in his hand. It seemed like a good substitute for a torch when he left. Enkrid walked back the way he had come, his footsteps echoing. Much later, a lake panther, looking like a black cat, descended to the ground.
Dodged the magic after seeing it.
Esther was very surprised. She had never thought anyone could perform such a feat. Of course, the opposing wizard's skills were poor, and then she realized anew.
It's natural that I don't know everything.
She hadn't lived her life traveling the world. Rather, she lived a reclusive life, so there could be people with such skills somewhere. In any case,
I've struck it rich.
Esther delves into magic and indulges in knowledge. At one time she had stolen and read several grimoires of other wizards out of curiosity. Esther rummaged through the items with her claws and scoffed.
This level of skill.
It was crude, at least, to her eyes. The real treasure wasn't these items, it was this one, the one called Varmilo, a creature stitched together from monster parts, magical beasts, and human corpses, a guardian to complement the wizard's physical abilities. Such creations were commonly called flesh golems by wizards, though they might provoke a primal sense of disgust in humans. For a wizard, they were incredibly useful monsters. Esther, squeezing out every last bit of her strength, raised her claws and carved a magic circle into the flesh golem's forehead. The black earth and the world of fire. It was a ritual to insert the stitched monster into the world of spells she possessed. The dead wizard had been utterly foolish. If he had awakened the golem from the start, Enkrid's chances would have been incredibly slim, of course. Esther wouldn't have stood by and let that happen. Soon, she finished carving the magic circle. Through the ritual, the worlds became connected. The flesh golem's entire body began to fragment and crumble. It disintegrated into dust and disappeared. This was the process of transferring to the other world, connected to Esther's inner world. In the place where the golem had stood, nothing remained but the traces of where it had sat. The panther, witnessing this, panted heavily. Esther was exhausted. She had used up every last bit of her remaining mana. She only thought about returning to her quarters and getting some rest. Still, she couldn't leave without a final gesture. Esther, honoring the wizard who had created the flesh golem, gave him a memorable name.
Bonehead.
He was the most foolish of all those she had seen exploring spells.
A wizard in the city sewers? Yes. And you killed him? Yes, that's correct.
Enkrid was indifferent, and so was the company commander. Afterwards, she left to verify the situation, and Enkrid washed up and checked his equipment. He had considered supporting the beast's subjugation request immediately, but his sword had broken. Finding a new sword was the top priority for now.
What did you get up to?
Rem asked Enkrid upon seeing him at the quarters.
I went to war with a pair of boots.
No way, does that shoemaker make ego boots? Do boots fight that well?
It was half a joke, half an expression of surprise. Ego boots were a reference to ego swords, which were said to be swords that could think for themselves. It was a legendary tale. Not only Rem, but everyone else was looking at Enkrid, seemingly wondering what had happened.
I'll report back soon.
The company commander would be returning shortly, and it was best not to leave and get caught out.
Where's Esther?
Before heading out, Enkrid looked around and asked. Auden, who was in a corner, answered.
She often steps out. She'll likely return to your side by evening, brother.
He was telling him not to worry. Indeed, it was a panther that looked more cunning than intelligent. No one would be able to harm it. Upon returning to the company commander's office, the commander arrived shortly after.
It was there. The spell traps and the dead wizard, yes. A potential threat beneath the city. Is that so? Well done.
Enkrid, wary of the commander's jest, saluted. He pressed the handle of his sword with his left hand and bowed his head. Afterwards, returning to the quarters and explaining the situation to the squad members, they were all surprised.
Why would a wizard be there? Well, I suppose cutting them down does the job. In the sewers? You've punished a wicked one, brother.
Even Enkrid had no idea why the wizard was there. Though he wasn't injured, he was exhausted, so after resting for 2 days, Enkrid tried to repair his sword, only to be scolded by the blacksmith.
This is completely ruined. It's not good. What did you do to it? What? You cut down a wizard?
The blacksmith looked at Enkrid with a peculiar expression, not quite believing him. Enkrid decided not to mention the wizard. There was no benefit in the townspeople knowing about it. There had been a threat, but it was gone now. Even if no one knew, it was enough for Enkrid to know he had done his duty, so he had no major complaints.
Even if what you say is true, do I look like someone who can make a weapon to withstand spells?
The blacksmith was somewhat recognized within the border guard, but not enough to be famed across the continent. That was his level. When Enkrid shook his head, the blacksmith responded,
From now on, it's better not to do such things. This sword is beyond repair. A good sword? I don't have any right now. Should I make one for you? No Valyrian steel, just regular iron.
Valyrian steel wasn't easy to come by.
That's unfortunate.
Wait a few days. I've got a contact bringing in some raw iron from the Noir Mountains. You know it's expensive, right? You'll need to come with a hefty sum.
The blacksmith said, showing his palm. It was a tempting offer. Noir Mountain raw iron was several times stronger than regular raw iron. While it might not be considered a legendary sword material, it was rare enough to be among the top materials used for expensive weapons in the forge. In some ways, it was even harder to come by than Valyrian steel. So, there was a lot to look forward to. He was leaving the blacksmith's shop when he heard a familiar voice call out to him.
Hey, soldier.
It was a familiar voice that stopped Enkrid. It was in the middle of the market. Someone half running caught up to him, thrusting a worn-out pouch into his hands. It was quite a large pouch, big enough to easily fit a pair of boots.
Here.
What is this?
Your shoes are worn out. Wear these.
It was the shoemaker. Though the shoemaker didn't know him, Enkrid had seen him for dozens of days, the owner of the hole-in-the-floor shoe shop.
Why?
When someone gives you something, just take it.
The shoemaker, looking a bit embarrassed, turned away. Enkrid couldn't help but chuckle. The shoemaker didn't know what Enkrid had done. He was just grateful for the job being handled. A pair of boots. Killing a wizard with a bizarre hobby didn't seem like much of a reward, but the boots were new. Finely crafted with no flaws, that was enough. Enkrid took the boots and returned to his quarters. The next day, Enkrid, though not quite familiar with it, strapped on Ragnar's spare-arming sword to his waist and set out to kill a beast. No one disputed that what he needed now was practical experience. He was a bit eager. He wanted to quickly integrate the experiences he had gained from exploring the wizard's lair. He was more motivated than ever.
Is it just me, or do you seem really excited to go kill a beast?
Rem, who was accompanying him, asked with a smile as they headed out.
No, you're right, I am excited.
Enkrid responded to Rem's words as usual, and he meant it.
Form up.
The commander's shout echoed. Approaching were 8 wolf beasts. Beasts and monsters were formidable threats, especially since the border guard was in a city frequented by caravans and merchants. They were quite proactive in clearing the surrounding monsters and beasts.
Why are they so active in winter?
One soldier grumbled as he readied his spear. To Enkrid's ears, it sounded like he was deliberately trying to ease his tension. 20 soldiers, following orders, formed a solid phalanx against the wolf beasts. It was standard to face beasts one on many. The platoon leader adhered strictly to the basics, and Enkrid found that uncomfortable.
This is the first time for something like this.
What he meant was the desire to rush out, yearning for real combat, which training couldn't satisfy. A fight that drew blood, the time to consolidate what was gained from it, the very moment of taking a step forward. That's what Enkrid longed for, not poking at the approaching beasts with a spear. This wasn't helpful, it felt almost boring. Normally, seeing a beast should make his legs tremble. Rem, unusually quiet, laughed beside him.
You look frustrated.
Normally, he would tell him to stab the beast's eyes instead of looking at faces, but the frustration made him speak.
Can you see it? Now the squad leader has become the odd one out.
Rem laughed with an incomprehensible remark and added another comment.
Didn't you know there's a fine line between extraordinary and crazy?
He didn't. What would happen if he jumped into the midst of the 8 beasts? Assuming Rem had his back, it seemed it would end much quicker than stabbing at them one by one with 20 spears. How long would it take to clear all the surrounding monsters and beasts at this rate? It would take a long time. It felt like wasting time. Having never once neglected phalanx training until now, his body naturally fulfilled its duty as part of the formation. But the frustration remained. Rem kept laughing beside him, which felt like it was pushing him. Why did he come along and do this? Enkrid thrust his spear forward. The forceful spear tip grazed the beast's forepaw. The wolf beast, reacting to the pain, bared its fangs. The squad leader, seeing this, aimed for its head and thrust his spear, but the cunning beast evaded by backing away. Up to that point, Enkrid deliberately conjured idle thoughts. If not, he would find it hard to resist the urge to rush out and draw his sword to cut them down. He thought of the panther he had once happened to raise.
Esther.
After splitting the head of that insane sewer wizard, it wasn't long before the lake panther returned, utterly exhausted. It reeked, as if it had eaten some of the rats roaming the sewers. Too focused on hunting city rats, it lay on the ground, panting heavily. Feeling sorry for it, Enkrid soaked some jerky in water and fed it to him. Esther eagerly accepted and ate it up.
What have you been up to?
Idle thoughts vanished. A wolf beast had approached within spear range. Pushing aside thoughts of Esther, Enkrid thrust his spear at the wolf's head. The skin on its head tore and blood splattered.
Don't lose your position.
The platoon leader's shout rang out. The unit maintained distance by thrusting their spears at the approaching beasts, threatening them and keeping them at bay. This fight won't end quickly. The pack of attacking beasts, after being stabbed several times, retreated. This is the right approach. This is the standard tactic. Yet it still felt stifling. Enkrid saw the platoon leader commanding the soldiers. A well-built figure with a neat appearance. Was he from the 2nd Company or the 3rd? Harboring frustration and impatience, Enkrid continued wielding his spear. It's not masterful, just thrusting and pulling. It felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. The spear didn't feel natural in his hands. If he had used a spear as his main weapon, he might have been worse with it than a sword. Ragna had once said,
Swords or spears, what feels natural in your hands can differ.
typically knights are encouraged to handle various weapons, so he learned the basics, but only the sword felt like it fit perfectly in his hand.
The sword.
Only the sword. It felt like meeting an old friend from the moment he first held it. The thrill, joy, and anticipation of wielding a sword for the first time. The pounding heart, the warmth of the sharpened steel.
I want to use the sword.
He wanted to relive the experience he gained from the wizard's lair. He wanted to swing a sword, not a spear.
Your wish is granted.
Rem muttered beside him. As Enkrid's gaze turned to him, Rem was already rushing forward.
Let's finish this.
Rem rushed out with a shout, a hint of cheerfulness in his voice. Dirt flew up with every step he took. It was dynamic. His running seemed wilder than the wolf beast's.
That crazy bastard.
The platoon leader yelled as if he had been waiting for this. Facing beasts while maintaining the formation is fundamental. If the formation breaks, other soldiers' lives are at risk. Breaking formation was undoubtedly wrong. Enkrid knew this well, but
Why not just kill all the beasts?
he couldn't hold back. The desire itself was unbearable. The urge to rush out, swing his sword and relive his experiences. Enkrid inwardly closed his eyes. For a moment he relied more on his instincts than rational judgment. Following his instincts, Enkrid threw aside his spear and sprinted forward.
What the hell, you two?
The platoon leader's shout faded into the background. Rem's sudden action was within the platoon leader's expectations, but Enkrid's was not so. It was only natural for him to be shocked.
Having fun?
Noticing Enkrid following him, Rem spoke while swinging his 2 axes. The 2 axe blades traced arcs in the air. The ends of those arcs inevitably led to slaughter. The first axe split the head of a wolf that had just approached head-on, and the second axe, slashing sideways, split the jaw of a beast trying to bite his arm. The 2 axes were like executioner's blades,
Just a bit.
acknowledging what needed to be acknowledged. Enkrid also drew his sword. He drew it and slashed horizontally. One beast, in the middle of its charge, had its front leg cut off. Even a beast's cry was similar to a dog's. Enkrid pulled back his horizontally extended arm and slashed vertically. The wolf beast's head was split open. Pulling the sword out of the split head, he struck the head of another wolf, charging from the side with his sword-wielding fist. The beast, hit in the head, rolled to the side, only 8 beasts.
I don't know since when 8 beasts became only.
In any case, right now these were not a threat to Enkrid. Axes split heads, and swords cut and slashed wolves. The arming sword in his hand didn't slash as well as a longsword, but it wasn't too bad. Ragnar had regretted not being able to join them. One of the 8 beasts had been killed by the spears of the phalanx. Of the remaining 7, 4 fell to Rem's axes. 3 were split by Enkrid's sword. It was a remarkable display of skill. It was proof that their rank as elite soldiers was well earned.
Wow, they fight damn well.
One of the soldiers in the unit muttered in awe. The platoon leader should have yelled at them. He should have, but instead thought, "They leave me with nothing to say." They really did fight incredibly well. While forming a phalanx is the basic tactic for facing beasts, if one possesses exceptional strength, using it is also a commander's skill. Instead of getting angry, the platoon leader considered efficiency. This was a good thing for Enkrid and Rem. By strict standards, they were disobeying orders. More importantly, the platoon leader highly valued Enkrid's presence. He had seen him a few times before, and back then he hadn't seemed very impressive. When had he developed such skill? Had he suddenly improved as the rumors said? He didn't know. He couldn't be certain about anything. He could only judge the results.
They are above the elite.
He would believe it if someone said they were one of the slaughterers of the frontier. When they go on beast hunts, they often rely on individual skill rather than maintaining a formation.
You too.
Instead of reprimanding them, the platoon leader assigned them a new mission. If they wanted to fight, let them.
There is a place where troublesome beasts have appeared. Go there.
Understood.
Among the dead beasts, Enkrid the Spellbreaker nodded. At his calm demeanor, some soldiers let out cheers. After all, they had wiped out the beasts. This meant their mission here was over, and the unit could go support another area, allowing them a brief rest. No one enjoys fighting beasts and risking their lives. You need to be either extraordinary or insane. At least one of the two.
We will return to the city to regroup.
The platoon leader decided, leading the unit back. Enkrid glanced at Rem. Rem, wiping the beast blood off his axes, grinned.
Do I owe you?
Not at all.
Though he said that, he felt relieved. But the desire for more still burned within him.
This isn't enough.
The thirst that a few wolf beasts couldn't quench. Real combat, not training. The fire ignited in Enkrid's chest burned fiercely.
Let's go, they told us to head elsewhere.
Rem said. A few soldiers who were returning to the unit approached and patted Enkrid on the chest.
Thanks to you, we got to go first.
The smiling soldier's face was familiar. Enkrid racked his memory. It was the soldier from the dice gambling table on the first repeat of today. He handed Enkrid a piece of jerky wrapped in a clean cloth.
Try it. It'll be great.
He said and turned away. Not just him, but several others showed their approval with their eyes. A well-fighting soldier is always welcomed by his comrades. Enkrid also had a pleasant personality, so his reputation wasn't bad. Unlike Rem. Everyone kept a reasonable distance from Rem, partly because he was a barbarian, but mostly because his rough personality and tendency to pick fights with anyone when bored were well known.
Seems like we fought together, but we get treated differently. Is this discrimination?
It's karma.
Enkrid said, tearing the jerky in half and sharing it. He took a bite.
It's different.
It was delicious. The soft piece of jerky swirled in his mouth before he swallowed it. The seasoning was just right, and whatever marinade was used gave it a sweet taste.
What is this? Why is it so good? Right, I'll have to ask for more later.
He was curious about the secret recipe. Enkrid pulled on his gloves. The thick leather gloves fit snugly, providing sturdy protection. They were one of the items from the corpse-loving wizard who lived in the sewer. Especially when striking wolves, the impact was much less than expected. It was indeed a good item. Although what the wizard did was unsettling, the items themselves were innocent. The gloves were sturdy, made from layers of leather. They offered excellent protection and were good for punching, serving well as gauntlets. The leather armor worn under his gambeson was equally reliable. After all, it was an item that had protected him against the wizard's attacks. When Kreis had said it wasn't just any ordinary item, Enkrid had thought it was merely durable. With his solid gear and newfound insights, Enkrid spoke with determination.
Let's go.
Following the platoon leader's orders, Enkrid and Rem moved to another area. half a day's journey south of the city. They headed to where their allied unit had gathered.
This looks like the place.
Seems like it.
They had only a simple map and directions to find it. When they arrived, they found an established camp. They wouldn't set up a camp like this unless the beast or monster extermination was quite serious. Moreover, it was currently in a state of uproar. As they approached, they noticed something flying in the sky. Enkrid muttered as he joined the battlefield. Rem followed, hopping along behind him.
Ka.
A scream erupted above. A horrific monster announced its presence. Below it, soldiers with gouged eyes and limbs scratched and torn were lying around.
My eyes, arg, shit, kill it, kill it.
Several crossbowmen fired bolts into the sky. The bolts sliced through the air, but didn't hit a single target.
Ka.
The monster's cry was an awful noise, making one want to cover their ears. This was the battlefield. The enemies were monsters and beasts. Directly below the flying monsters, a unit of heavily armored soldiers formed a phalanx. These were heavy infantrymen, all clad in chainmail. This was the first company composed entirely of heavy infantry.
Everyone, hold your positions.
The infantry company commander shouted. The name of the flying monster was Harpy. With the upper body of a woman, wings instead of arms, and the lower body of an eagle, it was a grotesque sight. Red feathers fluttered in the air, and the harpy's chest heaved. Despite its resemblance to a woman's chest, it didn't evoke any sexual feelings. It was just unsettling. Seeing the harpy, Enkrid froze for a moment. It reminded him of a time in the past when he had to turn away from a comrade's death. The appearance of the harpy made any resistance by a few mercenaries meaningless. Death, more death, and retreat. It was a painful memory. Though not friends, he had lost over a dozen comrades. The harpy cries had a disorienting effect on people's minds. There were over 5 of them in the sky. 5 crossbowmen aimed at them, but as seen earlier, hitting and bringing them down seemed impossible. Just as Enkrid entered the battlefield.
Looks like things are getting interesting. You okay?
Rem asked beside him, and at that moment, one of the harpy dived toward the newly arrived pair. It cut through the air. Its talons, as hard as steel, would gouge out eyes if one were lucky. Otherwise, it would tear open skulls. As the harpy approached, Enkrid briefly relived the past, but only for a moment. He never left regrets for past events. Instead, he focused on moving forward. That was how Enkrid lived. He drew his sword. In that instant, everything seemed to slow down. He traced the trajectory from point to line, and his intuition screamed a warning. The boldness from the heart of the beast gave Enkrid strength throughout his body. Aligning with the falling harpy's trajectory, Enkrid's sword moved in the seemingly slowed time. The platoon leader of the 4th platoon, belonging to the heavy infantry company, was a commander who had recently transferred to this unit from the center.
Damn it.
Since he was affiliated with the unit, he decided to adapt and conduct actual combat training by going on a mission to exterminate monsters. Of course, it was quite large in scale for such a task. The original mission was to exterminate a large pack of humanoid dogs. Still, it was fine. The heavy infantry didn't get the reputation of being a force that could devour Krona for nothing. Ultimately, he embarked on the mission confident in the power of his unit. Suddenly, a harpy appeared. It was a troublesome situation. Why did a harpy suddenly show up? He called for support. The heavy infantry formed a defensive formation. In the meantime, a few soldiers supporting the unit died. While the crossbow bolts flew aimlessly, the reinforcements arrived. Just 2 light infantry soldiers.
Are you kidding me?
They even recklessly stepped into the harpy's attack zone without fear. That was suicide. The commander didn't know Enkrid or Rem. He was still adapting to the atmosphere within the unit, having recently transferred. Of course, he had heard about the Spellbreaker and the notorious squad leader, but he didn't have time to worry about that. When he saw the 2 during the extermination operation, he was furious.
Shit.
Curses naturally escaped his mouth, even if there was subtle tension between the heavy infantry and the light infantry. Watching his comrades die in front of him was not enjoyable. Who would want to see heads torn off by a harpy? The 2 light infantry soldiers were Enkrid and Rem, and the fact that only the 2 of them appeared was because they didn't wait for the other unit members and joined first. Thus, the archer unit requested from the main force hadn't even arrived yet.
Hey, back off.
He was in such a hurry that he couldn't finish his sentence. He wanted to tell them to run away or duck their heads. In this position, they could withstand the harpy's claws and attacks. Over thick gambesons, chainmail, and a breastplate reinforced with thin iron plates, steel gauntlets, and greaves. On top of that, they held square shields and formed a defensive formation. It was a strategic defensive posture befitting the nickname Turtle Heavy Infantry. They could hold out until the reinforcements arrived. Therefore, to the harpy, those who were less protected were easier prey. The harpy, spotting the new prey, rushed at terrifying speed. The commander saw the red feather fall and draw a long arc downward. Even if he wanted to help, he had no means to do so. Now he could only quietly watch them die and vow revenge later. Just as the harpy's claws were about to split the soldier's head. Schwack. The commander heard the friction of metal and the sound of flesh being cut. All he saw was the harpy's back. Since the harpy's body size was similar to an adult male, he couldn't see exactly what the light infantry soldier had done, obscured by the falling harpy. What he did see was the harpy's wing tearing, its body hitting the ground like a failed skipping stone, bouncing once in the air, then rolling on the ground. The harpy, which had flaunted its red feathers and bouncing breasts, was now half covered in blood, with dust covering its entire body. The harpy lying on the ground wailed. The commander couldn't even blink. What is this?
Huh?
In an incomprehensible situation, only a single question remained. The commander's eyes scanned the situation, soon forcing everything into the realm of understanding. The harpy flew in. It was cut down with a sword. Is that even possible? It was an extraordinary feat rarely seen. What if the harpy's claws had deviated slightly? What if the timing was missed? What if the cutting power was insufficient? Everything would have been a problem. The fact that someone would do such a thing was crazy. Who would dare to do such a thing against a charging harpy? Even in the border guard, known as the slaughterer of the frontier, how many could pull off something like that? Luck. It was incredibly fortunate. Apparently, he wasn't the only one who thought so, as two more harpies circling above glided down, targeting the two again. They were fast. It sounded like the harpy's claws were tearing through the air. The commander's eyes focused on the two light infantry soldiers who had come as reinforcements. The angle of the harpy's attack was different from before. The commander clearly saw how the two responded. Although he saw it, he still had nothing to say, as their movements were beyond his comprehension. The soldier with the axe dodged the incoming claws by twisting his body, then swung the axe. He only registered that it had been swung. Before he knew it, the harpy's head split vertically with a loud crack. The harpy, whose head was split, plunged to the ground, leaving marks like a burst tomato. It left a long blood stain as it slid across the ground, with the split-headed harpy lying there. Another harpy was dead. It was a visible feat of axe-wielding. The other soldier did something similar. The soldier who had initially torn the harpy's wing now held his sword and slashed vertically again. How is that possible? As he swung his sword, it seemed like the harpy was rushing towards the blade. It was a result of predicting the harpy's movements and swinging the sword. If that wasn't a feat, what else could it be? However, this time the aim was slightly off, and the harpy's chest was slashed. The soldier's sword split the harpy in half, but he also lost his grip on the sword, not that it made any difference. The sword was embedded between the harpy's two breast-like mounds. The harpy tumbled to the ground once again, scattering blood. Its guts were split and shattered. That one, too, was as good as dead. The commander involuntarily looked up. There were 8 harpies left. They hadn't killed a single one, but 3 had died as soon as these 2 arrived. Border guard? The commander misunderstood his opponents. Their skills were too overwhelming to be considered mere soldiers. Was this what elite soldiers were like? He had heard rumors about the slaughter of the frontier before being transferred, but it didn't seem to be to this extent. In the commander's eyes, he saw a group approaching from behind the 2. They were all carrying projectile weapons, such as throwing spears, longbows, and crossbows. They wore cloaks and had eagle insignias on their epaulettes, the real border guard. The guard leading them also assessed the situation. He saw it with his own eyes. Their skills had improved. to the point where it was hard to confidently say they could be easily defeated. The one leading the guard was Torres. He was the platoon leader of the border guard, who had various ties with Enkrid. Judging someone's skills solely by their ability to kill monsters was foolish. However, Torres knew he didn't have the confidence to pull off such feats against an incoming harpy, especially not twice in a row. Luck? Torres had the same thought as the heavy infantry platoon commander. At that moment, the third harpy flew in. Torres's gaze dropped from the harpy to below. There he saw Enkrid pulling a sword out from the chest of a recently slain harpy.
Hey!
Torres shouted. It was a warning to look up. What should he call this? Enkrid connected the dots. He split the time. He swung his sword as his instincts guided him. As a result, he cut the wing of the first harpy. Next to him, Rem whistled. The lingering sensation in his grip conveyed the harpy's hefty weight. No problem. He picked up his sword again. The harpy flew in, and this time he slashed the chest and let go of his sword. If he had kept holding it, his hand might have torn apart. His judgment was accurate. A single strike connecting the dots, a powerful sword slash. The result was the death of the monster. As Enkrid bent over and swung his sword down, the harpy's claws passed over his head. The sound of it tearing through the air was chilling, but it didn't feel dangerous. Just dodge it, a simple attack pattern. Dodge, slash, stab. It was an application of swordsmanship. He stepped onto the bouncing chest of the dead harpy, placing his foot where a human's collarbone would be, and pulled out his sword. Such tenacity. Its chest was half split, with intestines spilling out, yet it blinked. It was still alive. Enkrid was looking at the harpy he had slashed, but his senses were focused on the surroundings, particularly the harpy diving from above. He could feel the air's vibrations without seeing it. His senses were clearer than ever.
Hey!
He heard the shout, but he was already moving before that. He stabbed the wing of the dying harpy with the tip of his sword and pushed with all his strength. The muscles in both his arms strained, and he exerted force from his waist and thighs. He lifted the dying harpy upwards. The incoming harpy collided with it and tumbled to the ground. After blocking the harpy with another harpy, Enkrid rolled to the side, using the technique of dispersing the impact by moving his body intentionally and predictably to absorb the remaining shock. As soon as he got up from the roll, Enkrid quickly dashed towards the fallen harpy's head and brought his sword down on it. The blade split the harpy's head with a sound like splitting firewood. That makes 4. Rem had killed one, and Enkrid had killed 3. The first one that fell already had a quarrel lodged in its head by a nearby soldier. Flap, flap. The group of harpies that had been flapping their wings above them began to scatter. Harpies were not creatures that engaged in unwinnable fights. They had fled. Enkrid, with his arms hanging down, swallowed his disappointment.
A few more times.
He wanted to keep fighting. He needed more experience. He was still in the process of learning and internalizing what he had been taught. He needed more actual combat to adapt and learn. Then, he could fully incorporate what he had gained from the sewers into his body.
All good?
Rem chuckled beside him. Being a perceptive barbarian, he seemed to have already grasped Enkrid's state.
Anyone else would say you're crazy, but at this point, you can be called extraordinary. But it's quite strange. I thought you needed more real combat, but how did it happen again in just one day?
He didn't delve too deeply, but expressed his curiosity. It was natural. Achieving such a remarkable improvement in just one day with seemingly the worst talent was not normal. Enkrid uttered his usual excuse.
I was lucky.
Rem knew one couldn't develop such skills with just luck, but he didn't intend to argue. After all, what did it matter? Seeing this guy so excited to wield his sword made it fun for him too.
There was a time when I barely survived being chased by harpies.
Enkrid muttered.
Really?
Yeah.
It wasn't a statement filled with emotion or meaning. It was just something that had happened. Enkrid remembered the comrades who had died then, and he shook off the memory.
This might not be revenge, but
at least there was satisfaction in having killed the harpy swarm. The disappointment still outweighed it, though.
You two, your affiliation, no, but...
The commander, who had been holding the defensive formation like a turtle, approached. He seemed bewildered.
Squad leader Enkrid of the 4th Squad, 4th Platoon, 4th Company.
He answered and saluted.
Squad leader? not the border guard.
No.
The border guard is here.
A familiar face Torres approached. He raised his hand and spoke. His gaze never left Enkrid. His eyes scanned Enkrid from head to toe. He wanted to ask what exactly Enkrid had done. How had his skills improved so much?
We came to support.
They hadn't even fired a single arrow. What was this, really? Soon, the commander of the 4th Platoon of the Heavy Infantry Company and Torres exchanged brief greetings and sorted out the situation. Enkrid listened to their conversation and abruptly asked a question. It was quite important to him.
Is it over?
What are you asking?
I was wondering if the monster extermination is over now.
What? Why is he asking that? 2 light infantry soldiers who killed 4 harpies. 2 ordinary soldiers saved the heavy infantry platoon. It wasn't a great achievement, but it seemed worthy of reward. One of them was seriously asking if this was the end. The other one, who looked like a foreigner, was busy laughing next to him. What is this crazy duo? The platoon leader thought and answered,
The original target was the humanoid dog pack, so it's not over.
The platoon leader hadn't forgotten the mission. A pack of humanoid dogs had formed a group around the border guard, blocking the merchants and peddlers. That's why they set out. Even though the humanoid dog pack hadn't appeared on the road outside amid the wall where the merchants traveled, judging by the appearance of 1 or 2 around, it was evident that a problem would arise soon. The mission was to exterminate the surrounding monsters and beasts to ensure the city's safety.
I want to join.
At Enkrid's words, the platoon leader thought.
Does he want to fight more? He seems eager to fight. Am I seeing things?
He wasn't seeing things. He was exactly right. What the platoon leader saw was the truth.